Well, hello, Alan, and hello, fellow Presbyterians. We are coming to you today as members of the building committee. Actually, the members you see here were part of several different committees that were part of the process that developed the additions, changes, and improvements to our church's campus. Let me first introduce our folks that are here. We have Harry Farley, Les Johnson, Dave Johnson, Chris Repp, John Copley, Carter Hudgins, Steve Eckel, and myself, Barry Jones. Alan, you were integral to and intimate with the whole process from start to finish. And we all know you've got a tenacious memory, but the committee thought it would be a good idea if we sort of review the steps and the milestones in the process that led to the changes that we actually implemented. It all started back in 2006. In 2006, we formed a committee called the Historic Futures Task Force, which looked at what our church's mission is and how our campus and our buildings support that mission and how we could change them to improve that. And that fed in then into 2008 into the steering committee. And the steering committee was charged with understanding what the congregation felt we should be doing. And they worked at that by having surveys that they sent out to the whole congregation. We held focus groups. We had a number of meetings of all sorts and collected the inputs from the congregation. And out of that, the steering committee provided the session their recommendations. Session then in 2009 formed a concept development team. And what the concept development team was to take the results of the steering committee and come up with some basic concepts, not really a design, but some basic concepts about how we might satisfy the requirements that were outlined by the concept development team. That then led to, in 2010, again, a feasibility study. And based on that feasibility study, session authorized two key things. One was they started a capital campaign, and Carter Hudgins was the chair of that. And we also started the building committee that would shepherd this through the rest of the process. Also in 2010, we awarded a contract to the architectural firm of BRW in Charlottesville. We worked with BRW in 2011 to form a master plan to address the different requirements that we were trying to satisfy. And in 2011, we started what we call phase one, which was the installation of the elevator into the sanctuary. That started in August of 2011. That contract went to Habilis, a small construction firm here in town, and was completed in July of the next year. And that completed phase one. And also in 2012, we started phase two. And phase two was the big part of the project. It was the modifications to the education building, the big addition with additional space, the renovation of the existing part of the building, and also the replacement of the complete heating and air conditioning system for both the education building as well as for the sanctuary. We completed that contract phase two actually in 2016. It was in the fall of 2015. We received permission from the city to move in and finally completed in 2016. So it was 10 years from start to finish, 2006 to 2016. It was a long but a deliberate process all the way through. And it involved many people in the congregation. Over 200 members of the congregation served either on one of these committees or participated in one of the many ways that we developed our requirements. And of course, the entire congregation participated with its tithes and its talents and its offerings in a variety of different ways to make this all possible. And of course, Alan, you were integral to this whole process. You were right in the middle of it from the beginning all the way through to the end. You were our leader, sometimes out front and sometimes out back, but you led us through this whole process. So what I'd like to do now, I could go on for with lots of details, but what I'd like to do now is to turn to the members of the committee and get them to reflect on some of the things they remember and some of their thoughts about this process of actually making these buildings happen. Les, would you mind kicking it off?
Okay, might as well. Actually, what my contribution really was to just simply provide some estimates, financial estimates for the cost of construction. And certainly, as we, the committee, kicked around ideas and kicked around concept of how the spaces should look, there were a variety of different things that we looked at, studied quite a bit, and then sometimes some of them got kicked out, some of them stayed. And using a program called RS Means, we developed some of those cost estimates, and those were shared with not only our own committee, obviously, but with the finance committee and with session. And there were often challenges about, well, why does it cost so much? And have you thought about doing things a different way? And those were always interesting and enlightening studies to figure out what we could do to get what we needed, get what we wanted, and still not have it, be a gold-plated lily. So really, one of the major things that really came out of our little revits, our design revits, was that, and you, Alan, were really a part of identifying this, is that the sanctuary actually sits in a green island, as it were, and that green island sits within the paved and built area of the city. And that was a unique characteristic of our church, and that it was the only downtown church that had that unique characteristic. And that was something that we really, really wanted to maintain throughout the whole process. And we managed to. So thank you very much for that. Harry, I'm kicking it back to you.
Great, thanks, Les. Harry, would you like to talk about the historic tax credit?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Alan, as you are very aware of the historic tax credit process, but others may not share your expertise, so we felt it appropriate to briefly describe the process. It is divided into three parts. Part one is a request to participate. Part two is the detailed set of improvements for the historic building or sanctuary. And part three is a summary of the completion of work and contains a detailed spreadsheet of all costs allocable to the sanctuary. And these costs had to then be certified by an independent CPA. Our part two improvements for the sanctuary HVAC included the new, our part two improvements included the new elevator and HVAC improvements. Based on square footage, as you remember, we were able to allocate 33% of the new education building HVAC costs to the sanctuary. We also added costs for unique new HVAC components that were installed in the sanctuary. As a result, our total costs were over $1 million. Here we have inserted two photographs, one of the elevator that was installed, and the second, a portion of the HVAC system that's in the education building mechanical room. Once the Department of Historic Resources in Richmond approves part three, you receive the dollar value of the tax credits. These tax credits are then sold at a discount to an investor. Alan, as you know, You and I have been working on this program for over 7 years. We have been successful because of the foresight of you as moderator and the session as a whole, choosing a great team for me to work with. Amy McCullough, Kathy Stevens, Dick Ridge, Dick Balsh, John Copley, and others. Thanks to both you and Barry for giving us the freedom to plan our work and to work our plan. Now, how did we do? We submitted part 1 in May of 2012, the most complex in terms of scope and detail. Our part 2 was submitted in August 2014. It later was revised in September due to required change in the balcony HVAC portion. And that was approved in January of 2015. We're also showing a title page here of the part 2 addendum that we had to prepare very quickly in order to satisfy the good folks in Richmond. Our part 3 with supporting financial data was submitted in November of 2015 and approved via December letter from the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. We were awarded $263,000 in historic tax credits. And fortunately, we had already contracted with an investor, as you're aware. Well, I was eating lunch with the prime timers at a local restaurant on January 13th, 2016, when I received a cell phone call from Richmond. The good news was we were going to get a wire transfer to our TPC Partners LLC account that afternoon for $208,000. I was very excited, told no one, but immediately called you. You said, "Hi, Harry, what's up?" I said, "We would be getting a wire transfer for over $200,000 this afternoon." You replied, "Who is it for?" I said, "It's for us." And you said, in quotes, "This makes my day." Since then, Allen, you have faithfully supported all financial transactions from our 2 LLC bank accounts over the past 5 years and more. We couldn't have done this without your support, though I did invoke wisdom from the Blues Brothers on the occasional bumps in the road when I said, we are on a mission from God. With God's help, we will terminate this program in 2021. Thank you, Alan.
Great, thanks, Harry. That was very beneficial to our financial plan to have a success on that historic tax credit, and it was a testament to the hard work of that committee to do that. Steve Eckel, calling in from San Francisco.
Yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit about the civil engineering and project management aspects of this project and committee. Civil engineering is typically the hub of a construction or renovation project. I don't say that just because I'm a civil engineer, but because it happens to be true. The other trades, especially mechanical, electrical, feed in and are interwoven into the whole project to construct and fulfill the architectural design. Our committee was blessed to have several people with project management and construction experience, as well as a first-rate on-site representative for our church, our very own John Copley. I don't think our contractor had worked with very many clients who understood engineering, construction, interfaced regularly with the project manager and the site superintendent, and held them accountable quite the way we did. Project management for construction projects is sufficiently challenging. When you throw in renovation work, a constrained construction site, and in addition to a working building, the project becomes even more challenging. Sounds like what I do at work. Allen was intimately involved, and he ensured the mission of the church was not negatively affected during the lengthy and technically challenging construction period. I was really pleased to be part of this project, and I believe Allen's leadership in executing an addition and renovation will benefit our church's mission for decades. Thank you, Allen.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks for weighing in on that. Carter, what can you tell us?
Well, what I can tell is this, and I'll reflect back on this, but was proud and honored to be a participant early in this project. But Barry, if you'll allow me a point of privilege, I want to make sure that I convey to Allen greetings from Charleston, from both Donna and from me, and to remind Allen that both of us here in Charleston consider ourselves fortunate that our time in Fredericksburg coincided with Allen's time in Fredericksburg. We're richer spiritually for that experience and grateful for having been part of his congregation. With that said, since Harry Farley has given me license to quote rock and roll stars, what's been going through my head for the last couple of days as I've thought about this is the lyrics from a Rolling Stones song that goes, "You can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need." And I say that because even though Mick Jagger certainly didn't have in mind how to fit programs into an old church and how to make old things work better, given the constraints that Steve has just talked about. But he certainly described what unfolded as you, Allen, led the congregation through imagining how we would guarantee that the historic buildings on that site live for at least another century, and how those buildings would serve the expanded programs that you were largely responsible for helping us realize as the congregation grew in number, as the outreach of our programs kind of grew in dynamism, and as we reached beyond what we were to what we became under your leadership. And so I reached back to the Rolling Stones. You can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need. And what we needed was leadership that would help us imagine how we would fit new things in an old building. And several of us have already alluded to that. But one of the challenges was making sure that what we did didn't undo the historic character of the place, didn't undo the spiritual values that all of us, I think, feel when we walk into that sanctuary. What we would do wouldn't diminish in any way what we knew and what we loved about that building and about the other buildings on that site. And so what unfolded with your leadership was coming to an understanding of what we valued, coming to an understanding of what we needed. And then through the fundraising program that Barry has already talked about, coming into an understanding of what we were capable of accomplishing. So what we wanted and what we needed were not entirely the same, but we got at a good place. And we have, I think, with your leadership again, made sure that the building will serve the congregation now for at least 100 years and kind of propel the church and its services forward. I've had the privilege of working with a congregation here in Charleston for the last 6 months. They've chosen a different path from the one that you led us down. Historic windows, they're expendable. Historic pulpit, let it go. Historic box pews, dumpster. Historic ornaments, they're expendable too. That church is much diminished. It's not the same, doesn't feel the same. It'll never be the same. It will never have the same characteristics. It'll never have the same spiritual power that it once did. From my vantage point and from my participation in the project, I want to make sure that at least I say thank you for making sure that as we were led through this, that we kept kind of front of mind, that the church would feel the same, would have the same spiritual effects on all of us who are fortunate enough to walk through the doors and be part of your flock. So Allen, thank you for all that.
Thanks, Carter. Thanks so much. And it's great to see your smiling face from Charleston, and regards to Donna. It's good to have you back and see you again. Dave.
my position on the building committee was quite unique. I ended up there as a liaison for the session to sort of work with both Barry and Allen in keeping the session up to date on exactly what was going on, what our plans were. And at my very first meeting, I learned something really important, and that was I was the only person on the committee that didn't have the slightest idea how the heck to build a building. So, and that was okay, because I think what I brought to the committee maybe was, as a middle school teacher, a lot of experience about what happens when you put a lot of people in a building and move them around. And our congregation probably isn't quite like middle schoolers, but we have our quirks too. And one of the things I want to talk about struck me is we were changing plans and clearly had to revise our goals and got initial plans from the architect. I don't think the architect always had a good idea of how our congregation worked and what we did. I remember the initial plan for the entrance to the addition had a marvelous staircase in it, but no place for a coffee pot and snacks. And that was a crucial issue for me. So we had to work through that. I think another one was that the initial stairwell to the lower floor was actually quite narrow. It might have been all right Monday through Friday, but certainly wasn't going to work when you had 200 people in Fellowship Hall for breakfast. Another one that I think we looked at was basically the kitchen, which I think we had a very nice commercial kitchen designed if we wanted to run a restaurant, but that's really not what we do either. You know, like in a home, I think our church kitchen is often a gathering area where 15 or 20 people gather, perhaps to cook, but for perhaps social events and other things too. So I felt privileged to work through a lot of those issues. And I think Alan, you know, leadership was obviously very important in bringing the changes together that I think we've ended up with a building, an addition, a plan that really works very well for us. And that's a good thing, for which I think we need to thank Alan and also all you people on the building committee who actually knew what you were doing.
Well, thanks, Dave. I think one of the things that's important to any design process is to have people who aren't too intimate with the process itself to provide their perspectives, because frequently they understand those needs and requirements better than the people that are trying to do it. And you were just one of several like that. Chris also wasn't one of the designer types, at least from a technical point of view, who was able to always add a different perspective into things. And that was incredibly helpful to us as we went along. So Chris, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. Well, speaking of the interiors, I guess I kind of signed up for that job because if you guys recall, our architect gave us a color palette, and it was filled with grays and browns. And I thought, you know what, that doesn't look very joyful to me. So maybe we take another look at that. And so Alan was gracious, and the team was gracious enough to say, here, Chris Repp, you can have that. And so we formed a subcommittee with Jean Bingham and Liz Thompson and Sharon Humes and Betty Merrill and Kay Copley. And we were able to come together and pick colors that were period specific and still had a lot of vibrancy, and it still looks beautiful. And we picked out all kinds of mirrors and sconces and the lighting, and we tried to keep it beautiful yet simple. And so that was a great joy to work with those people. And it was a stretch, but for me personally, but not for the people on that team. And they really carried me and carried the rest of us, so that we came to a beautiful ending.
Great. Indeed we did. Thanks, Chris. John.
Well, Alan, I was a go-between between the church and the contractor to keep Skip sort of online or happy anyway. As with any building project you go through, you've got ups and downs and goods and bads and all of this. And the first thing I was thinking about when Barry asked about putting this together was, what can I do? And the biggest thing I could remember was the bad things, which we always sort of run into. And I'll talk about those for just a second. First was the telephone pole that we couldn't get out of the way. You had Verizon, Comcast, Dominion Power all hooked to that pole, and nobody wanted to claim it or would get their equipment off of it so we could get it out of the way, because it's right in the middle of the foundation. That delayed the program for probably a couple months before we finally, and we were working around other things, but it still held us back on getting things going. Allen stayed with us reluctantly on that, but anyway, it all did finally work out. A couple other things I could think of that we looked there, and Les mentioned some about the green area. We looked at trying to make the facility more green or more efficient. One of the things we looked at early in the program was looking at a ice storage facility or ice storage type air conditioning system, where we would run an air conditioner during night to chill water, or actually freeze water and store it in tanks on property, and use that to run for the air conditioning during the summer, or during the day when it was hot. The Kenmore uses the same type, the paper, the Freelance Star uses the same process there. And we looked at trying to do that, and turned out that when we looked at our power rates that we were paying for electricity and all that, and went through all the numbers, it just didn't turn out to be efficient or be any savings on our part. Second thing, we looked at doing geothermal, and we actually drilled a geothermal well, or a well to be geothermal, and run tests on that, and decided that we could not get enough out of that well, and plus the number of other wells, we didn't have the property large enough to drill a number of the other wells to be able to get enough capacity from that. Kenmore uses the same process for their air conditioning system, heating and air conditioning. But anyway, that didn't work out for us. So we went to essentially conventional air conditioning heating systems for the building. But it took us a while to go through all that rigmarole to figure out whether it was really was going to work for us or not. It was sort of interesting to go through it anyhow. The other thing I guess we ran into that we had troubles with was we had leaks. We replaced the brick on the patio 3-4 times. It was something like over 40-some thousand bricks that were laid and relayed over that process of time before we finally got the leaks taken care of. And Allen bared with us through all of that, which you had to bear with us through all of that. But anyway, those were sort of the bad parts of it. The one part, this was sort of to be Allen's 25th anniversary celebration for being here. And when the project was completely finished, and actually go back through some of the other projects that were done in Allen's term here, we've probably done more to expand the campus of our facility than had been done in probably the last 100 years, or maybe even more than that. That this was the first time that things had been expanded, had been improved. I guess the next thing to that would have been probably in 1940 something, when the French Memorial Chapel had burned, and then it was rebuilt in the early 60s, around 1960, as what was our original education building. But Alan has been here during or through most of this construction, reconstruction, expansion, and you've really been with us through the whole time that we've been here, and we really appreciate it. You were really called to be our minister, so thank you, Alan.
Thanks, John. You know, one of the things I was thinking as I was listening to each of the members talk is how everybody you see here and many others that aren't shown here participated in so many different ways and wore different hats and contributed in a variety of different ways. And I think all we were able to share in this short video is some vignettes of some of the things that stick out in our minds. I have sort of an anecdotal comment that I think captures for me part of the significance of what we've done here, and that is, as you know, Alan, Peg and I usually sit in the balcony on the Princess Anne side, and one of the things we can see from there is the door to the elevator. And I'll tell you that it warms my heart greatly when I'm sitting there on Sunday morning and I see people coming out of that elevator. I think about how many of those folks could not be with us in worship were it not for us having made this change to the sanctuary. And of course, the same thing goes to the educational building. Our generation inherited a campus really of exquisite beauty with these grand old buildings, and they command reverence and are inspirational. And you know, we could really do no less than to try to make these changes that we make that would be consistent with the grand buildings that we inherited. And Alan, you reminded us of that as we went through every step of this process. I think that was always in our minds for any and every change we made, that it should be as good or better as what we were able to inherit. These buildings are something that we'll leave behind. They'll be our legacy to future generations. We as members of the committee are proud and thankful that we could be a part of this effort. And Alan, I think we all are gracious for your inspiration, for you spearheading and for shepherding this process all the way through. So thanks and Godspeed to all. God bless.